The fluorescent lights hum faintly above the packed courtroom, casting a harsh glow over the somber faces within. Zephaniah Odell sits at the defense table, his wrists resting stiffly on the wooden surface, as if the weight of this moment has left him unable to move. His fingers twitch, his nails pressing against his palm in silent protest. He looks up briefly, scanning the jury, 12 strangers who now hold his fate in their hands. Not a single one of them looks like him. The prosecution is in full stride, the district attorney pacing before the jury, his voice ringing with certainty. We have security footage, ladies and gentlemen, footage that clearly shows a masked individual of the defendant's height and build. He gestures toward the flickering screen, where a grainy black and white clip plays for the third time that morning. A hooded figure moves across the store in jerky, distorted motions, barely distinguishable beyond vague outlines. Zephaniah watches in exhausted frustration. It's not him. He has said this 100 times, through interrogations, through hearings, through restless nights in a cold jail cell. But none of that seems to matter. His lawyer, a tired-looking man in his 40s named David Lorne, barely lifts his head. His suit is wrinkled, his notes stacked carelessly. He hasn't objected once during this sequence. The judge, Alistair Grimshaw, leans forward slightly, his expression unreadable, though something about his stillness feels pointed. The jury watches with passive expressions, some barely concealing their boredom. If you're invested in this story so far, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Now let's get back to it. From the gallery, a muffled sob breaks the tense silence. Callista Odell, Zephaniah's mother, clutches a well-worn Bible against her chest. Her knuckles are white from gripping it too tightly, as though the weight of her prayers alone might tip the scales of justice. Beside her, Eamon Odell, only 19, sits with his fists clenched against his knees, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. Zephaniah shifts slightly in his chair. He never should have been here. A week ago, he had been sitting in his small apartment, arguing with his girlfriend Amaris about whether they should adopt a stray cat that had started lingering outside their door. He had been working part-time at a mechanics shop, taking night classes, trying to pull together something stable for his future. And then out of nowhere, the police had shown up at his door. No warrant, no questions, just accusations. A store clerk shot dead during a robbery, and an eyewitness claiming they saw a young black man running from the scene. Now he was here, his life hanging in the balance over a vague description and a blurry video. The DA's voice cuts through his thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a simple case. A tragic case, yes, but a simple one. The evidence speaks for itself. Zephaniah exhales, his pulse pounding in his ears. The evidence says nothing at all. But he can already tell it doesn't matter. Not to these people. Zephaniah watches as his lawyer, David Lorne, finally rises from his chair, adjusting his tie with a sigh. This is his moment to lay out the truth, to prove beyond a doubt that Zephaniah was nowhere near that store when the crime happened. Lorne clears his throat. Your Honor, the defense would like to call Amaris Talbot to the stand. A quiet murmur ripples through the courtroom as Amaris, a young black woman in her mid-20s, walks toward the witness stand. She looks composed, but Zephaniah can see the tension in her shoulders. She meets his eyes for a brief moment, her expression unreadable. Once seated, she adjusts the microphone. I was on a video call with Zephaniah at the exact time the robbery took place, she says firmly. He was at home, with me. We talked for almost an hour. There's even a call log that shows. Before she can finish, the prosecution jumps in. Miss Talbot, the DA interjects smoothly, you and the defendant are in a romantic relationship, correct? Amaris's brows furrow. Yes, but so naturally you would say anything to protect him, wouldn't you? His tone is calm, but the implication drips with condescension. Amaris grips the edges of the stand. I'm telling the truth. The DA shrugs as if it doesn't matter. Or maybe you're just covering for your boyfriend. He turns to the jury. After all, wouldn't any of us lie to protect someone we love? A few jury members exchange glances. One, an older white woman, crosses her arms and exhales heavily, already dismissing Amaris's testimony in her mind. Another man in his 60s scratches his beard, looking skeptical. Zephaniah clenches his fists. They're not listening. They never were. His lawyer tries to redirect. Miss Talbot, did you save the video call records? Yes, she says, reaching into her bag for printed copies. I have screenshots and timestamps. Objection, the DA interrupts. Your Honor, the authenticity of these records is questionable. There's no way to confirm when they were taken or if they were edited. Judge Alistair Grimshaw barely glances at the documents. Sustained. Lawrence sighs, shaking his head as he returns to his seat. The so-called airtight alibi is falling apart before their eyes, not because it lacks evidence, but because the court refuses to believe it. Next, Sergeant Linwood Tate, a white police officer with a cleanly pressed uniform, in a practiced, authoritative tone, takes the stand. I spoke with a witness who saw a man matching the defendant's description near the store earlier that day, he states confidently. Lorne frowns. A witness? Do you have a name? Tate hesitates for half a second. The witness asks to remain anonymous. A flicker of uncertainty crosses Lorne's face. So no official statement? No security footage showing my client outside the store? Tate shakes his head. Just a verbal report. Zephaniah watches as the jury nods along, accepting this flimsy hearsay as gospel. It doesn't matter that there's no actual proof. A cop said it, and that's enough. Lorne, defeated, barely argues when the judge sustains another objection, cutting off a follow-up question. Judge Grimshaw has made it clear where his sympathies lie. The jury, predominantly white, looks bored as the defense struggles, but their ears perk up when the prosecution speaks. Zephaniah exhales, his fingers tightening around the edges of the table. He already knows how this will end. Zephaniah stares straight ahead, his pulse hammering in his ears. The words don't feel real, as if they were spoken in some other courtroom, about some other man. His mother, Callista, wails from the gallery, a gut-wrenching cry that silences the murmuring crowd. She clutches her chest, gasping for breath, as if she's the one whose life has just been taken. Eamon, his younger brother, slams his fist against the wooden bench, his face contorted in anger. This is bull! A bailiff moves toward him, but Eamon jerks away, hands shaking. He locks eyes with Zephaniah, his expression torn between helplessness and rage. Zephaniah doesn't move. He barely breathes. His lawyer, Lorne, simply closes his eyes as if he had seen this outcome from the start. He doesn't even look at Zephaniah. No apology. No fight left in him. Judge Grimshaw clears his throat, adjusting his robe with deliberate slowness. In light of the jury's decision, he begins, his voice laced with something dangerously close to satisfaction, I hereby sentence Zephaniah Odell to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The words slam into Zephaniah like a hammer to the chest. A sharp gasp ripples through the room, but Grimshaw continues unmoved. I sincerely hope that this verdict brings peace to the victim's family, he says, his eyes sweeping over the prosecution with a nod of approval. Then, for the first time since the trial began, he looks directly at Zephaniah and he smirks. It's slight, almost imperceptible, but Zephaniah sees it, and suddenly the weight of everything crashes down on him. He wants to scream. He wants to rage, to flip the table, to shake these people and demand how they could do this to him. Instead, he exhales slowly. A bailiff grips his arm, pulling him to his feet. For the first time, he turns his head, searching the crowd. His mother is being held up by relatives, her face streaked with tears. His brother is glaring at the jury with a hatred that burns. Amaris sits frozen in her seat, hands clasped over her mouth, eyes red and swollen. They all believe justice would prevail. They were all wrong as he's led away in cuffs, his life stolen from him in broad daylight. He hears something, not from his family, not from his lawyer. From the back of the courtroom. A whisper, a barely audible chuckle. He turns his head slightly and his stomach drops. There, sitting near the exit, is a man in a dark blue hoodie, hood up, hands in his pockets. A man whose face is eerily similar to the grainy surveillance footage. A man watching him and smirking. Cassian Voss tugs his hoodie lower over his face, his knee bouncing as he watches Zephaniah being led away in cuffs. It should have been over. The trial was a joke, a rigged game from the start. The jury ate up the prosecution's story without question. The judge barely hid his bias. Zephaniah never stood a chance. Cassian should feel relieved. Instead, something gnaws at him. Maybe it's the way Zephaniah's mother screamed, or the raw fury in his brother's eyes. Maybe it's the fact that Zephaniah never broke, not once. No desperate pleading, no scrambling to convince them. Just silent disbelief, like a man who still couldn't comprehend how his life had just been stolen. Cassian swallows hard. He needs to get out of here. He stands abruptly, shoving his hands into his hoodie pocket. But the movement catches the attention of someone else in the courtroom, Detective Lachlan Mercer. Mercer hadn't come expecting a case. He was off duty, sitting in the back, observing. He had no stake in Zephaniah's trial, but something about it unsettled him from the start. The evidence was flimsy, the so-called witnesses unreliable, and now, as the guilty verdict is handed down, he notices something even more unsettling. A man in a dark hoodie, shifting in his seat, eyes darting toward the exit. Mercer watches as the man's shoulders tense. Then he bolts. Cassian shoves past spectators, nearly knocking over an elderly man as he rushes for the doors. Mercer is on his feet instantly. He doesn't call out, doesn't want to spook him any more than he already is. Instead, he moves. Smooth, calculated steps, slipping through the dispersing crowd, eyes locked on Cassian as he pushes through the exit. The detective's gut is screaming. Something isn't right, and Mercer has learned to always trust his gut. Detective Mercer spends the night poring over the case files, cross-referencing every detail. The murder weapon? Never recovered. That always sat wrong with him. If the prosecution was so certain about Zephaniah's guilt, why couldn't they tie him to the gun? Because he never pulled the trigger. The next morning, Mercer follows his instincts. He reaches out to a confidential informant, someone with ties to the gang scene. A quiet conversation, a small slip of information. Cassian Voss had been bragging weeks ago, talking about a clean getaway. It's the break Mercer needs. By noon, officers execute a search warrant on Cassian's girlfriend's house. They tear through the place until they find it. A gun wrapped in an old cloth, hidden in a shoebox in the back of a closet. Forensics moves fast. Ballistics confirm it's the murder weapon. 2 days later, Cassian Voss is arrested. He denies everything at first, but when he's presented with the evidence, his DNA on the gun, the security footage, the holes in his alibi, he cracks. He confesses. He was the mass shooter. The robbery was a last-minute job. He panicked and pulled the trigger. And when Zephaniah's name was thrown into the mix, he stayed quiet. The revelation shakes the justice system. The courtroom that once dismissed Zephaniah's pleas is now scrambling to undo its mistake. His case is pushed back for urgent review. A year after he was wrongfully convicted, Zephaniah Odell walks free. His mother and brother wait outside the prison gates. The moment they see him, they run. His mother sobs into his chest, clutching him like she'll never let go. His brother grips his shoulder, eyes red with anger and relief. But Zephaniah, he doesn't cry. His face is hollow, his eyes distant. A year stolen, a life shattered, his job, his reputation, gone. He could never get back the months in a cage, the nights spent staring at concrete walls, the whispers that followed him wherever he went. Justice came, but it came too late. We appreciate you sticking with us until the end. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Your support means everything, and every like, comment, and share helps spread these important stories. Let us know your thoughts about the video below.